All right, we're recommencing the session with our next speaker, Suzanne Aigrat, who is right here at this august university, and she's going to take us into the realm of exoplanets that kind of are Earth-like.
Kind of.
Yes. So I will wave two fingers at you when it's 2 minutes, and you've got 18 totally. Yeah. Thank you.
You see so many of you come to my home university to talk about such a wide yet interconnected range of topics. I'm an astronomer, and so my primary motivation for doing the work that I do is putting ourselves in context. I'm trying to progress to the next slide. Is there something I should be pointing this at in particular? Sorry? I'm not good at telling jokes. There we go. No, apparently not. Oh. Well, I won. Yeah. Okay, so when you look out at the night sky, this is a picture taken by one of my postdocs at the observatory on top of La Palma of one of my graduate students whose work will actually feature later in this talk. You can see a large number of stars, and each of those is home to a planetary system. And I want you to put yourself in the position of not speculating, but knowing that many of these stars are surrounded by planets, and that a significant number of these planets are hosting life forms. This is the place we want to be. We're not there yet, but we already know that the vast majority of these stars host at least one and probably several planets, and what's more, that a significant percentage of them host planets which are sufficiently Earth-like that it makes sense to look for life around them. A significant number means anything between 2 and 50%, depending on who you ask. So it's a very broad range. And my talk is about how we're going to try and narrow that number down to a more precise value and try to tell you precisely which are the systems in our galactic neighborhood where we should be looking. So to look for exoplanets, we are reliant on observations of the star, primarily, because planets emit very little light of their own. This is a top-down view of a simulated star-planet system. It represents what we would call a hot Jupiter-type system, so the planet is around 1/10 the diameter of the star and is on a very close orbit. Now, we have to imagine that we can't see the planet at all, but as the star orbits the center of mass of the system, its motion has been greatly exaggerated here. We can measure the very tiny shift in the wavelength of the light that it emits through the Doppler effect. And we do this by taking time series of very high spectral resolution spectra. And we can use that to measure the radial velocity of the star and produce a plot that looks a little bit like this. So this is a plot of radial velocity as a function of time, and during one orbit of the planet, if the orbit is circular, you'll see a sinusoidal variation. Again, for this kind of hot Jupiter-type system, you see variations with an amplitude of several tens of meters per second. But the Earth induces in the sun a variation with a semi-amplitude of 10 centimeters per second on a year's time, okay? So that is an absolutely minute signal that we are looking for. We can also look for planets via the transit method. This is when the planet passes in front of the star. And if we monitor the brightness of the host star, then we will see a very small dip that lasts a few hours and repeats once per orbit of the planet. And again, this is actually simulating a relatively large planet around a star, a little bit smaller than the Sun, so the transit is a few percent deep. For a planet like the Earth, the transit would be approximately 1 part in 10,000 of the star's light. And it would last of order 12 to 13 hours. What's more, the probability that the Earth transits, if viewed from some random location in the sky, is only 1 in 250 because it's far from its host star. So these are some of the challenges that we face. This is a representation of a schematic representation of the Sun-Earth system, seen to scale from a distance. And you can see that it would be much more challenging to detect this planet than it would the larger planet I was simulating before. But the fact of the matter is that the star doesn't really look like this. Unfortunately for us, this is what the Sun actually looked like during a month in January this year. And what you're seeing is images taken every hour, and the Sun is rotating. The rotation period of the Sun is about 27, 28 days, depending on whether you're looking near the equator or near the pole. It varies, but you can see these large active regions. These are regions of concentrated magnetic field through the surface layers of the Sun, and they cause these dark spots. We call them sunspots on the Sun, star spots on other stars. And you can see I've still shown the Earth to scale up here, and you can see that some of these spots are larger than the Earth itself. So they cause variations when we monitor the light of the star, which are significantly larger than anything we can hope to detect from an Earth-like planet. So that is kind of the challenge that is at the core of what I do. And this is an example of the data set that was used to detect the first terrestrial planet to be found to transit. So the first planet which we think is made up primarily of rock. It's called Corot 7b. It was found 15 years ago now in data from a Franco-European space mission called Corot that I was involved in. In the top panel, the black curve shows the data coming from the mission. We're seeing the flux of a star observed over a period of about 5 months. The star's a bit smaller than the Sun, and it has a rotation period of about 24 days. Unfortunately, I can't get the laser pointer to work, but you can see dips that repeat in a quasi-periodic fashion every 24 days or so. These are caused by large star spot groups on the surface of this star. It's much more active than our own Sun, so its variability is much larger. We're talking about a few percent, whereas on the Sun, it's a few tens of percent at most. But because the variations are smooth, we can filter them out and obtain the residual shown by the green curve here. The blue is the smoothed out version, and the red is just a bin version of the green curve. Now, if you run a transit search algorithm that is searching for periodic dips in that light curve, you find a very clear signal with a period of about 20 hours. This is what you get if you phase fold this signal at the detected period. And you see that we have a very clear transit with a depth of about a depth of about 4 times 1 part in 10,000. So this is a planet which is about 2 times the radius of the Earth, but with a period of around 20 hours. It's extremely hot. It's the first example of what we call a lava world. Measuring the mass of this planet was actually extremely challenging because of the activity of the host star. To measure the mass of the planet, we used the Doppler effect, as I shown you earlier, and the same star spots which cause these photometric variations also cause variations in the apparent Doppler shift of the star, because if we go back to this animation here, if I can get it to animate, there we go, then the approaching part of the stellar disk is moving towards us. The receding part is moving away from us. And so if a spot hides alternately the approaching and the receding part, it will cause an apparent signal in the radial velocity of the star. So in order to detect planets more similar to the Earth, we needed to go to space in order to reach the sensitivity, but also to be able to go out to longer periods and to find transits which last a significant amount of time. on the Earth were limited to transits that only last a small fraction of a night, or at least it's extremely difficult to find transits which are longer than a few hours. And so the first large-scale transit search mission after Corot was Kepler, and you've all heard of Kepler. It found thousands of exoplanets. I'm just showing this one, which is an artist's illustration of Kepler 186e, which was the first Earth-sized planet to be found in the habitable zone of its host star. The host star is a relatively small star compared to the Sun. Now, in 2015, after Kepler had completed its observation, but not after the analysis of the Kepler data was complete, that took a few more years, we had a sample of more than 1,000 transiting planets with well-determined stellar parameters. But of those, only 5 lie in what I would call a potentially habitable region, which I've defined here to be less than 1.6 Earth radii, because that's what at the time we thought was the maximum radius beyond which a planet was likely to acquire significant hydrogen and helium envelope. So this axis here shows the amount of flux the planet receives compared to the Earth. And here, this box goes from about 0.4, which was where Mars sits in our solar system, to about 2, which is where Venus sits. So we have a very small number of these stars, these planets, and they all orbit really small, faint stars, which makes it extremely difficult to follow them up in detail. So the next and current transit search mission from space is TESS, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, which surveys the entire sky over a period of 2 years, and it scans bands of the sky for a month each. And TESS has discovered thousands of relatively small planets around stars which are also somewhat smaller than the ones that Kepler targets, but over the entire sky, enabling much more detailed characterization of these planets. But it's not sensitive to planets like the Earth because it doesn't quite have the sensitivity and it doesn't observe for long enough in general. I want to highlight a citizen science project that we're running using TESS data called Planet Hunters TESS, and where we are asking for the help of thousands of citizen scientists to examine light curves from the TESS satellite and to find this very small but significant subset of the transit events that are missed by automated pipelines. These tend to be long-period events, so transits which occur only once per year or even longer than that, and which are often embedded in some significant or unusual variability of the host star, for example, young stars or evolved stars. And the latest paper from Planet Hunters is this one, where we found a transiting Neptune-sized object in the habitable zone of its host star. And actually, when we did the radio velocity follow-up, we also found a closer-in non-transiting planet that was seen only in the radio velocities. A feature of citizen science projects like Planet Hunters is that the citizen scientists who help us to discover these planets by marking the data that they see through the Zooniverse website are included as co-authors of the paper. And this is the event that they first identified here. So just to show you the kind of events that human eyes are able to identify. This event was not identified initially by the TESS pipelines because the TESS pipelines focus on events that occur multiple times within the data set that it's analyzing, which wasn't the case for this one. We since have seen repeated transits. Right, so today, thanks to both TESS, the second Kepler mission called K2, ongoing reanalysis of the Kepler data, and many ground-based projects, we now have nearly 4,000 transiting planets that are well characterized, and the number of those that are potentially habitable with the same definition has grown significantly, but they're still all around faint and small stars. And it's extremely difficult to measure their masses. In fact, there are now some very, very significant ongoing observing programs on the world's best radio velocity facilities that are aiming to confirm the masses of some of these objects, or some objects that have been found by radio velocity only that don't transit, but they each take hundreds of hours of telescope time. I'm feeling slightly ridiculous here. There we go. Okay, so this leads me to the Plato mission. So this is an artist's impression of Plato. I'm sorry if you can't see it very well, but Plato is a spacecraft on which sit 24 small aperture cameras. And so it's the European Space Agency's Cosmic Visions M3 mission. It will be launched at the end of 2026. And it does high precision, high cadence, long baseline photometry, just like Kepler and TESS, but with a precision similar to Kepler, but a field of view similar to TESS. And that allows it to find potentially Earth-like planets over a very significant part of the sky and around bright stars that are near to us. So another important feature of Plato is that it will not only find transits, but on the same stars and using the same data, it will perform what's called astroseismology, which is measuring seismic waves propagating through the interior of the stars. This allows us to probe the interior structures of the stars very precisely and to measure the masses, radii, and ages of the stars really precisely. And this is important because we only ever measure the properties of our planets relative to those of the stars. So our involvement in Oxford is to handle the stellar variability noise that I told you about in the exoplanet pipeline, and in particular to produce lots of simulated data sets on which we can test different algorithms. There's a lot of, I've not gone into technical detail here, but there's a lot of innovation going on at the moment in the different ways of treating the variability and disentangling it from planetary signals. So this slide just gives you an overview of all the different elements that go into the characterization of an exoplanet. It's a really complex process. So on the one hand, you need to detect transits. From the transits, you get a measurement of the planet radius relative to the stellar radius, and you also get a measurement of the orbital period and the inclination of the orbit. You then also, from the same data, can detect seismic oscillations in the star, and from those, initially what you get is the density profile within the star as a function of radius within the star. By comparing that to theoretical models of stellar interiors, you can convert that to an estimate of the stellar radius, the mass, and the age of the star. And I insist on the age because this is one ingredient that we've been missing from previous exoplanet characterization efforts. The age of a main sequence star, normally without astroseismology, we can usually measure with a precision of approximately 100%. It's really very imprecise. Whereas with astroseismology, we think that we can do it to a precision of about 15%. And that will be very important for understanding how planetary systems evolve. So the one missing ingredient is the planet's mass, and for that we do need radio velocity follow-up on the ground. It's probably one of the most challenging aspects of Plato, but one reason why Plato is unusual as space missions go is that the ground-based follow-up is part of the mission itself. So it's being organized, and I was very interested to hear some of the talks this morning about different kinds of alert brokers for transients, because we will face some of the same kind of problems when we're carrying out the follow-up of Plato targets, although the timescales are very different. Okay, so we know that Plato is currently being assembled in the lab. The cameras are completing their testing one by one. They're being integrated onto the spacecraft. It's on course to be launched towards the end of 2026. And a recent paper has presented some yield estimates for Plato, which I'm not quoting precise numbers because they actually depend very strongly on what you assume for the incidence of planets in different orbits and of different sizes. But essentially, based on what we know currently from the planet population, we expect to find several thousands new transiting planets around bright stars. This is planets of old kind, but that is a very significant number compared to what we had before. So these are planetary systems which we can characterize in detail. Thank you. We also expect that a few dozen of those will be planets with radii smaller than 2 Earth radii and orbiting in the habitable zone of their host stars. And the current number of those for stars brighter than 11th magnitude is none. So this will be where this will be a sort of field-changing sample of planets. I now move to the radio velocity follow-up. I wanted to just briefly mention one of the ways in which we are bringing machine learning into the analysis of the data, particularly for measuring radio velocity masses for exoplanets. So radio velocity signals that we observe for stars are the combination of activity signals, which we don't understand very well, and planetary signals, which we do understand very well. But we have other traces, other time series we extract, which also probe the activity signals, albeit in somewhat different ways. And we've developed multi-dimensional Gaussian process models where we're essentially modeling all these time series as different combinations of latent variables which we never observe, but which are represented by a Gaussian process. And then in the case of the radio velocities, we also have the planet signal, which is what we're interested in. And this allows us to efficiently but robustly disentangle these different kinds of signal. In order to put that to good use, I mentioned at the beginning of my talk that only 1 in 250 Earth-like planet transits. And we really want to find all the Earth-like planets that are in the solar neighborhood. So we also want to perform some blind radio velocity searches. For this, we need incredibly good time sampling in order to be able to disentangle the planet signals from the stellar signals. And the survey that I'm involved in, which will do that, is called the Terra Hunting Experiment. It's got the worst acronym ever, THE. But it will sit on the Isaac Newton telescope in La Palma and monitor around 40 bright stars. We're going to put all our eggs in that basket. 40 carefully selected bright stars for 10 years, and we think that will give us enough to detect and measure the masses of any Earth-size, Earth-mass planets out to around 300-day periods that orbit those stars. So, this is my conclusions. In 10 years, when these surveys are near completion, we will have a much larger sample of well-characterized, smallish planets orbiting bright stars, a significant sample of Earth-like planets to evaluate their incidence and to know where to look for future characterization. We'll have added the age dimension to planet demographics, and we will also, I didn't mention this, but lots of different types of exoplanet observations are coming together on the same systems, not only transit and radio velocity, but also astrometry with Gaia and increasingly direct imaging. And that will give us a much more complete view of the architectures of planetary systems. Thank you.